So my lesson is about theme in literature, and it's going to be focused on identifying themes in literature and analyzing how they are developed throughout the literary work. In this case, I'm going to be using poetry, so teaching students how to identify themes using poems. So this is my Google slide presentation that I would be displaying if I were teaching this in the classroom. And I've titled it Reading Between the Lines, Determining Theme, because sometimes theme can be directly in our faces and the author is telling us what the theme is. But most of the time we have to read between the lines and we have to figure out what they're trying to teach us and what the theme is. So, of course, I would have the learning target displayed for students. It would be written on the board, and the learning target is I am learning to determine the theme of a poem and analyze the development of the theme throughout the poem. And then we would go over the agenda as well, which would also be written on the board. The agenda is a bell ringer, a discussion about theme, a short poem reading, the poem I Too by Langston Hughes, and then an exit slip. So the bell ringer that I would have students do for this lesson is to think about a movie, a TV show, or a book that they enjoy, and to think about how they were able to connect it to their life somehow, and if they learned anything from it that they could apply to their lives. So I've asked them to choose one example of a movie, TV show, or book and describe what they have learned from it, and to write their answer on a sheet of notebook paper. So I've included a little picture here that I thought was cute of a caterpillar reading a book, and then a child watching their favorite movie or TV show, whatever it may be. So after students have had time to complete their bell ringer, I will ask them to share their responses with the class. After we've had time to discuss their responses and everything that they learned from that movie, TV show, or book, we're going to discuss what theme is. So I would explain to students that the lessons they learned is the theme. And a theme is the underlying message of a literary work. And of course, literary works can be poems or stories, things like that. And then I would also explain that we can think of it as the lesson of a story and basically what the author is trying to teach us. I felt like it was important to include a second definition, kind of expanding on the first definition, because just telling them it's the underlying message may be a little confusing and not very clear. And I would explain to students that sometimes the author tells us the theme and it's right there in our faces, but sometimes, most of the time, we have to read between the lines to find the theme on our own. We have to really analyze the literary work. And then I would make sure that students understand that theme is not to be confused with main idea. That's a very common misunderstanding that students have. They get main idea and theme confused. So I thought it was important to distinguish the difference between theme and main idea. And of course, I would explain that the main idea is what the literary work is mostly about. So it's different than theme. Theme is the lesson that the author is trying to teach us. So after we've discussed what theme is, we're going to take a look at some examples looking at two scenes from movies. So there's a scene from Avengers, and there's also a scene from a movie called How to Train a Dragon. And I wanted to show some videos because the class that I wrote the lesson for, Miss Wilson's first period class, or even her second period, they loved the videos that I showed them when I taught my lesson on irony. They just loved it. They loved seeing clips from movies and shows that they've actually seen and being able to understand the concept in that way. So, what we're going to do is we're going to watch a scene from the movie, but before we do so, I will give students a target question. I'll ask them to think about what they think the theme is, what lesson is being taught in the scene. And then we'll watch the video clip and then we will discuss it. After we've watched the videos and had a little bit more practice identifying the theme, we're going to actually take a look at a poem by Langston Hughes called I Too and practice identifying themes in that poem together. So before we actually read the poem, I do want to give students a little bit of background information on Langston Hughes as well as the Harlem Renaissance because he was a influential leader in the Harlem Renaissance. He was a writer, he wrote many poems, and he, like I said, he was a leading voice during the Harlem Renaissance. So he's very important. And I would explain the Harlem Renaissance was a movement in which African Americans used literature, such as Langston Hughes' poems, theater, visual arts, and more to take back control of their story because they were subjected to racism, racist stereotypes, and they wanted to challenge that in their work. And they wanted to tell their story in their own way, tell it themselves instead of people telling it for them. So we'll read the poem and then we'll see if we can determine the theme and how it's developed throughout the poem. So what we'll do is we're going to use the Kagan strategy, think, pair, share. So I will have students think quietly by themselves what they think the theme is and write it on a sheet of notebook paper. Basically take notes about what they thought and analyze the poem. And after they've had time to do that by themselves, they would pair up with their shoulder partner and discuss what they thought. And then we'll all come together as a class and we'll share our thoughts together. And then after we've had practice identifying the theme together with that poem, the students will have an exit slip in which they will practice identifying the theme by themselves. So they will be given a copy of another Langston Hughes poem called Mother to Son, which is right here. And then they will be asked to read the poem carefully and answer questions in a Google form that I will be giving them. Which is right here. And it will ask them, well, here, first of all, they'll have directions right here. So I'll explain the directions verbally, but then they'll also have it in text on the Google form. So one of the questions asks students to determine what they think the theme of the poem is. And I've written on here to remember what the theme is, the underlying message or lesson, to kind of help students remember and get their brains working and thinking about what we discussed. And then I'll ask them to cite 2 pieces of evidence from the text that support the theme. And then to think about how the theme is developed in the poem, specifically focusing on the conversation with the mother is having with her child, because the poem is about a mother who's sharing that with her son that she's had a lot of adversity in her life and the steps that she's climbed, the stairs, They haven't been very pretty. They've been very hard, but she keeps going and she marches on. So basically, the theme there would be that you keep pushing forward and you do your best and be positive because you're going to experience adversity, but that doesn't mean that you should just stop and not keep going. So I've told the students to think about what the mother is discussing with her son during their conversation. I've given a little hint here just to help students, start thinking about that conversation and analyzing it so that they can see how that conversation helps with the development of the theme. And then that's it. That's my lesson on theme. And thank you very much for watching.